Thank you, Ethan. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dr. Chandra, Dr. Shabir, Dr. Taj, and Junaid, and brothers and sisters from Pakistan, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia. Welcome to the IRF Summer School 2020. And as Ihsan has said that last month we celebrated the 10th year anniversary of IRF. And as he had mentioned, reform and renewal has been our core activity in IRF. Basically, I would like to explain about what we meant by Islamic reform, because this is the main theme of our summer school for the next few days. Because recently, I think most of you have read this article written by one professor, which was published in a Chinese portal about the last Muslim reformer. So I think that somehow or rather that term was basically was not correctly explained, because I think what the writer meant, and I have written rebuttal to him that what he meant was the last Islamist, right? Because basically that the whole idea was not about a reformist, but it was more of an Islamist. But what do we mean when we say about Islamic reform? Let me give a speech on this subject, a short one. Yeah. The IRF from its inception has its main agenda in promoting reform, or what is known in Arabic as Islah, and renewal or tajdeed. Now, what is meant by the word Islah and tajdeed? When we talk about reform or renewal, one has to understand that the crux of reformist thinking has a principle: not to change Muslim of today into imitators of Muslims of yesterday. Faithful to the principles, we must find out how to live with our own time. That is, to look at the 21st century rather than to go back to the 1407th century. Yeah? This reform movement has at first requirement knowledge of the comprehensive message of Islam, its universal principles, and the tools available to help human beings to adapt themselves to their society as well as to change the world. This reform movement requires a true intellectual revolution. That's the key word. This is an intellectual revolution that will make it possible to be reconciled to the universality of Islamic values, to develop a critical mind, and that is why our tagline is لِقَوْمِ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, for people who think, to make choices by exercising reason, and always not to imitate either the past or the present. So that is why sometimes in my writings I always use the term what is known as Salafiyah Aqlaniyah, yeah? rather than Salafiyah Harfiyah. Means that Salafiyah that goes back to the time of the Prophet and the pious predecessors, but Aqlaniyah means that using the intellect. Yeah, is I want to differentiate it between the current trend in this country and in the world of this what is known as the Salafi movement, which to me is basically the Salafiyah Harfiyah. We can debate and discuss about that in the next few days. This reform movement requires adaptation and integration of values that are not contradictory and making it our own, or even they're from sources outside the folds of Islam. In the Quranic account of the story of the world's first murderer, Cain, or Qabil, yeah, he is depicted to have been in great distress, not only because of his crime, but also because he had no idea how to dispose of Abel's dead body. He doesn't know how to dispose of Habil's body after he murdered Habil, right? The story continues. Thereupon, God sent forth a raven, which scratched the earth to show him how he might conceal the nakedness of his brother's body. And Cain cried out, "Oh, woe is me! Am I too weak to do what this raven did, and to conceal the nakedness of my brother's body?" And was thereupon smitten with remorse. This was in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 31. What can we derive from this story? The moral of this story is that if God can teach mankind through the observation of how animals behave, there is surely a lot to learn from how other human beings conduct themselves or exercise their faculty of reason, irrespective whether they're from the East or the West. If you were to analyze the writings of Muhammad Asad in Islam at the Crossroads, a book that has changed me, we will realize the strong emphasis he placed upon Muslims to adhere to the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah. The Sunnah, he emphasizes, is the key to understanding the Islamic rise of more than 13 centuries ago, and why should it not be a key to understanding of our present degeneration? And then he wrote, "This does not mean that Muslims should seclude themselves from the voices coming from without. One may at all times receive new positive influences from a foreign civilization without necessarily abandoning his own." Asad continued, "An example of this kind was the European Renaissance. There we have seen how readily Europe accepted Arab influences in the matter and method of learning, but it never imitated the outward appearances and the spirit of the Arabian culture, and never sacrificed its own intellectual and aesthetic independence. It used Arab influences only as a fertilizer upon its own soil, just as the Arab had used the Hellenistic influences in their time. In both cases, the result was a spiritual enrichment, a strong new growth of an indigenous civilization, full of self-confidence and pride in itself. No civilization can prosper or even exist after having lost their pride and their connection with its own past." So to me, simply talking about the need for reform is not much better than bragging about our glorious past and extolling the greatness of our predecessors, and limiting ourselves in deriving guidance just from the first three generations of the pious predecessors or Salafus Saleh is clearly antithetical to the spirit and the very message of the Quran itself. So that's our idea of reform and renewal in Islam. With that, I thank you and I welcome all of you to the Summer School of IRF.